Hi, my name's Jordan Marshall and I'm Special Projects Editor at Building Magazine. I'm really happy to be chairing the final session of Digital Building Week. It's been a great week and this session is shaping up, I'm sure, to be another fantastic one. We have a great panel for you today who are going to discuss navigating Part L and net zero regulation. So first of all, we've got Mike White, Chief Technology Officer at ZooTech. We've got Stephanie Crombie, who's Head of Sustainability at Moreau and Lorraine. And Rico, I'm going to butcher your surname, I'm sorry. Thank you, Head of Housing and Planning at the NFB. So it's going to be another great session. We're going to cover lots of ground today. And I just wanted to let our audience know exactly how it's going to work. First of all, we're going to hear from each of our speakers. They're going to give a presentation and outline their views on the topic. Then they're going to come together for a group panel discussion and Q&A. Please do send through your questions at any time because we want to hear from you. We want to answer the questions that you want answered. In addition, we'll have a couple of poll questions during the session, so please give us your views on those because, again, we want to make sure we're giving you the best and most relevant information throughout the session. Finally, the session will be available on demand, so if you miss anything, don't worry about it. Feel free to get back into the session using the same link that you used to get in here right now. It's available within about 30 minutes of the session wrapping up. So you can also share it with a colleague and it'll be available for 12 months free on demand. That's enough from me to kick things off. So first of all, we're going to be hearing from Stephanie.
Hi, can you see my screen and hear me? Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Brilliant. Oh, move. Okay, cool. So, hi everyone. My name is Stephanie Crombie. I'm Head of Sustainability at Moreau and Lorraine Architects, and I'm really delighted to be here kicking off this session on navigating Part L and net zero regulations. So just a bit of background on us. We're a really small practice based in central London. We work mainly on retrofit and refurbishment projects in the city. We have a real strong focus on sustainability and have 6 core principles around sustainable design. These involve reducing whole life carbon, promoting circularity, benefiting biodiversity, improving well-being, and creating social value and designing for longevity. Although this talk is on Part L and net zero, I just want to note that it's important not to get caught up in carbon tunnel vision. We need to consider sustainability holistically within a variety of parameters that include climate justice as well as biodiversity crisis and a number of the elements that are on this graphic. So just please kind of consider that in mind when you're thinking about sustainability in a holistic way. So navigating Part L and net zero regs. I'm briefly going to run through what is Part L and why it's important, how the new Part L will save energy and what else needs to happen to enable a net zero future in construction. This will be more of a general overview rather than specifics of the regulations, which will be covered later on during the talk. So what is Part L and why is it important? For those of you who might not be aware, Part L building regulations set the standard for energy performance and carbon emissions for new and existing buildings. In June 22, 2 revised Part L documents were released, Volume 1 on dwellings and Volume 2 on non-domestic. In terms of carbon emissions, the headlines of the 22 updates are that new homes are required to deliver 31% carbon savings, while non-domestic buildings need to reduce CO2 by 27%. These updates are only an interim uplift, however, and they're paving the way for the future homes and building standards, which is due to come out in 2025. These standards will require all new homes and buildings to produce 75 to 80% less carbon emissions and be zero carbon ready. But what is zero carbon ready? This ties into the Climate Change Act, which commits the UK government to ensure the nation is net zero by 2050. This means reducing emissions by 80% on 1990 levels. And as you can see from the graph, we're actually on track. The red line's kind of where we're at. This is largely due to the decarbonisation of the national grid through renewable energy. But I'd just like to note that to remain within a kind of 1.5 degree future, the latest Climate Change Committee recommends 100% reduction on 1990 emissions levels. So we've got a long way to go. What does this mean for the built environment? Currently, our industry contributes 25% of total greenhouse gas emissions directly and over 40% indirectly. So you can see from this graph from the UK GBC, roughly those statistics and how they relate to embodied carbon, operational carbon, refrigerants and kind of infrastructure as well. So the dark blue is the surface transport and 42% including surface transport is enormously significant. What's this mean? So the UK GBC's roadmap for net zero in the built environment is shown on this graph. We're about here in the kind of just after 2020. And as I mentioned, we've got a really long way to go to decarbonise to 2050. The blue sections are operational emissions, and Part L is one of the key government policies to reduce these emissions in line with the 2050 targets. So how will Part L save energy in use? The new Part L has 3 compliance metrics to assess building performance. These are primary energy, measured in kilowatt hours per metre squared, carbon emissions, and fabric energy efficiency targets, which also encapsulate minimum standards for fabric performance and building services. These 3 metrics are more fabric focused than previous standards, and primary energy is now the main metric, as carbon emissions are a less effective measurement of the performance of buildings. This is because, as I mentioned, the national grid is decarbonising and will continue to do so, largely due to the upscaling of renewable energy and, as you can kind of see from the yellow, the decommissioning of coal. In 2000, coal was a really significant part, kind of almost 70% of the UK's energy mix, and it's kind of down by 2020, almost negligible. This is important because as buildings become all electric, the carbon footprint of construction will continue to decarbonise in line with the progress made with the national grid. SNAP 10.2 is the new assessment for residential reporting for Part L 2021, and it's responded to this decarbonisation with a much needed update on the carbon factor for electricity, meaning that things like air source heat pumps are now preferred over gas boilers. So you can kind of see the carbon emission of gas is roughly the same, whereas electricity is significantly decreased. Air source heat pumps very much are the future of how we are going to heat our buildings. You can see gas boilers emit twice as much carbon emissions than air source heat pump per useful kilowatt hour of energy, and they're also far less efficient. Air source heat pumps having a coefficient performance of 3, which means kind of 300%, 3 times as much energy you get out the kilowatt hour that you put in. It's worth noting as well that new legislation, possibly as part of the Future Homes and Building Standards, would likely look to ban gas boilers as early as 2025. But aside from banning fossil fuels, what else needs to happen to get to net zero in the built environment? Firstly, we need to consider embodied carbon. Embodied carbon encapsulates the emissions associated with extracting, producing, transporting and manufacturing building materials, and also their repair, replacement and maintenance over the lifespan of a building. Embodied emissions are shown in beige up here, so with the blue as operational. And these kind of embodied emissions plus these operational emissions equal whole life carbon emissions. As you can see, as operational emissions significantly decrease over time, these embodied emissions are going to become much more significant in relation to what we need to reduce to get to that net zero 50 goal. And as architects, which I am, this is one of our biggest challenges as well. The problem with embodied carbon is it's not currently regulated. There is a current campaign out at the moment called Part Z, which proposes undertaking whole life carbon assessments on all major projects and setting limits for embodied carbon. This is similar to how Part L at the moment limits operational energy. Secondly, we need to address the performance gap. There is significant evidence to suggest that buildings do not perform as well when they are completed as they were anticipated during the design stages. So this is a graph of EPC ratings for 420 properties versus their actual performance. It shows little variation in their actual mean energy performance and a huge range of variations in each band. So for example, this kind of C band here, your energy performance can range from what is almost probably passive house standards all the way up to 1,000 kilowatt hours per metre squared. No doubt these kind of two are anomalies, but it just shows the inconsistencies of EPC reporting versus actual building performance in use. This can be due to a number of factors, including discrepancies between design and as-built specifications, workmanship and user behaviour. Part L only looks at the design specification, but we need to get better understanding our buildings in use through building performance evaluations and things like post-occupancy evaluations. Better modelling is required, and tools such as SIBC TM54 and PHPP, which is part of the Passive House package, as kind of 2 examples, have been developed as alternatives to Part L. And they're able to assess the energy performance of proposed projects with much more accuracy. So this is your kind of Part L model. Admittedly, as part of the last SAP calcs, and this is your TM54 versus your actual building, just illustrating that the performance gap is a lot less based on the accuracy of your modelling. So just to wrap it up, I want to leave you with 3 key points about navigating Part L and the net zero regs. Firstly, Part L is paving the way for a net zero carbon future for the UK's built environment, but we really have got a long way to go. And it's as we kind of pick the low-hanging fruit, they're only going to get higher. So, change is a challenge, but we need to embrace it. We need to focus on embodied carbon and closing performance gap, as well as compliance with Part L. And it's really important that we don't get carbon tunnel vision, and we include other really important aspects around sustainability, such as biodiversity, well-being, circularity, longevity, and consider that within a holistic design thinking mindset. That's all from me. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Stephanie. That was such a great way to kick things off. Next up, we're going to be hearing from Mike. So Mike, will hand over to you and we'll hear your initial thoughts.
Right. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Let me just remove this. Okay, so my name is Mike White. I'm the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Zootech. I'm delighted to present today. So Zootech is a software company focused on unifying and streamlining capture, tracking, and use of building and asset information created throughout the building lifecycle. It's part of a group of companies called Build Data. And the other 2 companies in this group at the moment are CreateMaster, which is a market leader of digital handover, and Bond Digital, which is a market leader of information management and BIM. This is how I kind of conceptualize the company. So you've got Zootech, which is the software platform on the bottom level. Then you have all the various solutions and configurations, and kind of this is what we sell into the market. You know, BIM, handover, snagging, quality management, and then on top of that, we have our market-leading service companies. So we're a customer-centric business. We work with some of the leading house builders, owners, and developers in the UK, and we've been lucky because these relationships have really helped us develop our solution to assist the industry to deliver Part L. Just to take a step back to capture something about the Zootech software. So Zootech is a configurable platform, which means that when our customers on board, there's like an implementation phase. Our implementation team sits down with clients and agrees what's going to be enabled, and it means that you don't have to change your business process. The platform adapts to your needs, and it's got 3 applications: Zootech Cloud, which is our online single source of truth data system, holds all your data and your documents and your checklists and your inspections. Zootech Field, which is a field app which allows you to download anything you need to use in the field. You can use it offline and sync when you're back in the office. And Zootech BIM, which is a BIM viewer which connects all of your data and your models together and helps to gain long-term value from both of them. Now, what I mean by fully integrated is it's one single login to use all these applications. A lot of products in the market space will have a cloud system, and then you'll have a different login for field. In Zootech, it's all the one system. So what we're talking about today, what is Part L and what it covers, and then what's Zootech's role in evidence collection and compliance, and then the uplifted Part L. So just to touch on Zootech's role here, it really comes down to how to capture and log georeference photographic evidence during construction, and how to build one centralized record of all your photographic evidence, how to easily submit photos to the SAP assessor and evidence compliance to release EPCs and new BRL reports. So there's a poll here. Can you do the poll?
It's running now.
The poll's running. Do I have to wait till it's done, or will we just continue on?
You can keep talking, people can answer. We'll just
keep going.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So look, just to recap on Part L, Stephanie kind of went through it all in detail. I'm not going to go back there, but look, it came into force on June 15th this year. And since then, we spent our time working closely with our clients to develop a solution to ensure it meets the uplifted requirements. And yeah, so it applies to all new homes registered in England and Wales, and the overall idea here is to reduce carbon emissions, and this is seen as a sort of a first step. So when it comes to photographic evidence, how does ZooTech actually help? You know, photographs must be taken for each dwelling and stored on a record for evidence, and they need to be recorded against all these different construction stages for reasons that will show thermal continuity and quality of insulation. How the platform comes down to the specifics, it's digital, obviously, which is a requirement, and it's a high enough resolution to allow qualitative auditing of subject detail, and you can have close-ups and high-res images. There's geolocation data captured along with timestamp data. So this data is captured in our database in the file metadata, and it's watermarked onto our photos. So it's captured in 3 different places from an evidence perspective. And this sets us apart from when people just decide to throw their files up on a Dropbox or similar system. You know, ZooTech really gets this piece really well. Another thing is the file names can include the plot number and reference. So like, in other words, as you're starting to log your entire data set of files, it's a very simple means of being able to identify a file very quickly to see where it belongs. So our role in evidencing Part L compliance. So technology obviously plays a critical role here. These pieces here, you know, the capture, the centralization, the sharing, and the evidence, these are what the platform offers. And it really feeds the overall process, which is data capture, internal review, and then there's a workflow set up so that the SAP assessor is automatically notified as the items are identified so that they can review and sign off, or they can feed back issues back to the construction teams so they can address these issues during the construction phase rather than having to wait till the very end and then they realize they might have to knock a wall down to make some kind of remediation. And then the final output of this is the EPC and BREL reports. But the real important takeaway here is that ZooTech shares this information incrementally with the SAP assessor throughout this construction stage. Okay, the benefits of a digital approach, you know, easy to use, simple, it takes the pain away because it's set up around your needs. There's no Wi-Fi needed. So when you use our field app on site, you don't need an internet connection. You can download whatever inspections you want to take with you or create new ones, and you can work all day and then sync when you're back in the office. So all your photos, all your evidence photos with the watermarks are all synced. And the view here, obviously, it reduces defects and accelerates plot handovers. So poll number 2, would you consider an out-of-the-box platform for Part L? Is that poll set up?
Yeah, it's absolutely running. We'll leave it open for about 30 seconds.
All right, cool. This kind of brings you to one of the final stage of the presentation, implementation barriers. You know, things that we kind of come up against or we've identified when we engage with customers. There's a general, well, not all the time, but there's a general resistance to adopting new software. And with ZooTech, you know, we've got implementation and training teams on standby, ready to help and ready to empower your own team. And then the second item will be retraining of site teams that are used to using analog methods. But the thing is, the new you know, Part L defines the requirements as needing to be digital. You know, so analog methods are no longer a possibility here. ZooTech really takes the pain out of it, and you know, not to harp on about it, but you know, any of these digital platforms that do this really takes the pain away. It handles it makes sure all your data is captured right, it makes sure that your photos are tagged properly, and nothing's left up to the users, you know, going off on their own tangent. So why can't we just use SharePoint for this? This comes up sometimes. Again, SharePoint is more of a data dump, and really the governance and the integrity of the data can't be well enforced, nor does it allow you capture the metadata around the photos the way it should be captured consistently. And nor does it handle the workflows where the SAP assessor can get in and out very easily and progress the information. So the last point here is how do I give access to photos if a purchaser requests them? Not so much a barrier, but a good question we get asked. You know, the platform allows you to generate a PDF report at any stage, either for the entire site, for a plot, for a dwelling. You can set your filter and click PDF export, and it generates you a nice PDF that shows you all the items photographed with all the data beside them. And then just to finish up here on the ZooTech platform, the key takeaways are it's an integrated platform. It's your single source of truth with a single login. It's configurable, so it can adapt to your needs, other than Part L, by the way, whatever they are, and it complements existing quality management processes. So again, we adapt to your processes, not the other way around, and it's agile and adaptable. And that's the conclusion of my presentation. I think questions are going to be held to the end. Is that right? Hello? Are you up, Rico? Can't hear it.
I am up. Hopefully you can see my screen. Yep, can everyone see my screen? Can everyone see my screen now?
Yeah, I can see your screen now, yeah, gotcha.
Lovely stuff. For anyone seeing in the background, I've had a newborn, so I've been relegated to the garage, and I do apologise, so trying to be distracted by that. But I represent SME House Builders. My name is Rico Vutilevich from the National Federation of Builders, and the way I wanted to present our view on this is how this sector is really understanding the movement to Part L. And I think that the Part L is very, very much been treated as though it's an interim standard for us, because we recognise that the future home standard is the one that really we're going to be moving to, and SME house builders are typically the ones who deliver the outcomes. So I'm just checking. Yeah, you can see that, perfect. So the SME house builders are typically the ones that deliver the new technology coming forward. So if we take a look at, say, heat pumps, some of our members have been doing that for 10, 15 years, and so it came as a bit of a shock to us when we're told that house building doesn't do heat pumps and doesn't do decarbonisation. Apologies, you can only see it with notes.
Sorry. Yes, perfect. Would you put it in presenter mode, please? Thank you.
Is that one working now?
Rika, I'm going to share it for you because it's not working correctly. It's not displaying correctly. Just a minute.
I promise we did practice before, but I somehow have messed this up. Is that working now? There we are. Lovely. So yeah, so just I guess from the starting point, what I wanted to look at Part O, because the way that industry typically sees Part O is it's the starting point for, that doesn't appear to have changed, does it? You're still on the transition page? There we go. Lovely, thank you. You'll have to do it for me, I apologise. Yeah, so we're looking at Part O as really the starting point for everything, because get Part O wrong and we have recognised that we're going to have to change everything going backwards. So Part F, the ventilation, the type of energy efficiency we actually deliver within the strategy of the home. We are currently coming a little bit unstuck by the sizes of the cavities. And as SMEs will be the first ones delivering the regulatory changes, there are certain things to be concerned about. So we know that we're going to have to limit unwanted solar gains in the summer. I think that's a really beneficial model because it takes us towards a different way of designing and building. You know, we see the passive house model, which is a really great model, but perhaps not entirely suitable on all accounts, even though I know there's a lot of hype about that, and I do upset quite a lot of people when I say that. But what we're looking at is really to work within the parameters of the new Part O and Part L and Part F. You know, we'll need to provide an adequate means to remove the heat from the indoor environment, which may require mechanical cooling. Now, That's a particular concern for many of our members because there aren't really great skilled workers that can actually deliver these at scale, and it's at the scale that's important because the government would like to increase the amount of homes that SMEs deliver. We deliver between 15 and 30%, depending on what you call an M, medium-sized developer. But really, the transition towards electrification and decarbonisation really will start with SMEs, and it shouldn't be considered the other way around because it's the SMEs that are going to be pushing for industry capacity. So as part O, and I think a good example of that is the fact that many members are looking at the simplified method, but that's actually creating issues with delivery. So they're now looking at the dynamic thermal modelling, but unfortunately, there are very few people that do that at a cost that's relevant to the viability of a development. And the difficulty is that we don't find enough people that can have that turnover of the product in time. So if you're an SME builder, there are concerns. So on the next slide. We know that obviously this is the existing regulations to the new regulations, and really there shouldn't be an issue with hitting the regulations. So our view before the Part L changes was that set us the target and we will attempt to meet it. Now, what industry likes is certainty. So a good example of certainty is the 55% maximum flow temperatures. Now, what's interesting about that is it doesn't necessarily require you to use air source heat pumps. It's technologically neutral. So we are seeing members looking at different solutions for that. Electric boilers might be one solution, twinned with solar panels, but we are having some concerns because if you consider what a gas boiler is, it's an all-in-one system. And that all-in-one system is actually quite important for the development sector because it means that you don't have to go back to repair any issues. There are very few concerns because you're, in terms of the installation, because you're just doing it over and over again. So there's that consistency. Now, some of our members that have had good experiences with air source heat pumps, as an example, have continued to use them throughout, and what they've learned is that what they need to do is ensure that the home user understands the system, and we find that that's a really great barrier. When they've had bad experiences, it's either because homeowners don't appreciate them, or unfortunately the installation or the design is very poor. And it's that installation and design that is actually a really key component of making sure that Part L, in terms of the most complicated elements, which is going to be energy, I think, it is really satisfied. And so when we've got around 2,000 MCS accredited installers, which isn't a great number, there are some concerns that at scale, it's not really going to be deliverable, and we're seeing huge delays on air source heat pumps themselves. Interestingly, we are seeing some excellent innovations within the sector, whereby cylinders have been put within the air source heat pump themselves, or they're able to deliver mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. So that's actually shrinking the amount of concern that the developer has in installing these whole system solutions. So really, it's going to be about understanding how we can deliver this at scale, but also enabling SMEs to deliver the next generation of outcomes. And I think a really good example of that is solar thermal, or solar thermal with PV. It's a really great burgeoning market, and in some cases, we're looking currently at the future home standard, because effectively this is we're building up to the standard of as one model, which is a no heat model. Now, if you have a no heat model, suddenly you may not need an air source heat pump. You may decide to simply have a solar panel and a solar thermal system, and the solar panel heats your hot water in the wintertime, and the solar thermal heats it in the summertime. So you're reducing the need for energy strategies within the home. But the problem is that sometimes we see things as a silver bullet, and Part L has been seen as a little bit of a silver bullet. And just as an aside for that, getting regulation right is so important. The reason we have Part O is because previously we had a 90% uplift in Part L. What that actually ended up with is some local authorities were requiring that Part L uplift, and it was planners, not building regulations, within the local authority. So because building regs weren't overseeing it, planners were. We were getting passive house solutions, say, for example, or passive housing solutions within traditionally built homes or homes built to the current standards, and we were seeing worse overheating and worse air qualities. A Part O was quite important there. So we'll just quickly move on to the next slide. Won't take too long on Part F, because I did cover a bit of Part F. It's really ensuring that we understand what direction we go in, because MVHR is going to be quite an important solution. But there is a crossing point whereby you have to deliver mechanical solutions, and really that's 3 meters cubed. So once your air exchange is 3 instead of 5, which is the current system, that's where you really need mechanical ventilation. So what we're seeing is actually many developers are delivering around that 3.5 to 4.5 air exchanges an hour. But once they're being pushed down, further down from that, actually there may be some issues about how we have better delivery. However, we are seeing that actually MVHR may be a solution to overheating, which we won't go back any slides, but the simplified method where you reduce the amount of glazing is actually quite important, because SMEs especially don't like to deliver boxes. They like to deliver quite innovative homes. So ensuring that a greater number of the market can deliver that is really important. And on the next slide, I just wanted to cover another really important element of the building regulation changes, and that's Part S. And Part S is vehicle charging. And vehicle charging is a really interesting factor, because there are some clauses where you don't have to deliver EV charging points, but we've held this view for quite some time, and unfortunately it hasn't been understood or appreciated well enough, is that actually when we start to decarbonise, what we really need to do is start to move to a 3-phase system. Now, one district operator has actually required it in the East Midlands, I believe it is. So all of their new build has to be 3-phase. Now, on site, that's not a problem. The concern is where developers then have to start paying for off-site costs and off-site connections and reinforcement of the grid. And these sort of things really aren't particularly fair if you are trying to deliver a system where we all move together. So that's proving some concerns, and Part S is playing a good part of that, because actually moving forward, that 7 kilowatt charger realistically needs to be upped. And so if we add that, air source heat pumps, different types of cooking systems, and the general electrification of the grid, we are going to be soon seeing that 3-phase is going to be necessary. And 3-phase is necessary for a few reasons, because it's very difficult to say turn 1 or 2 homes. It's easy to turn 1 or 2 homes on your street into a home that can have higher amperage, but actually it's the rest of the home. So relying on developers to reinforce the grid is wrong. And so we've been fighting quite hard to ensure that if we are going this decarbonisation route, it's not simply put on developers. On the final slide, just to kind of really emphasize that cost element, this is one of our members' preliminary research into the costs. These homes sell for between 180 to 250,000, depending on the type of property it is. And you can see that they found there's over a 20% increase in the costs, 22%. One of our slightly larger members has found that on their homes it's between 12 and 15%. They're struggling actually with Part O, but this 22%, 22.58% moved to 27% very quickly when they started to add in the expertise required to deliver. And so what we're seeing is developers are happy to move forward, but we have regulations such as biodiversity net gain, which is unfortunately a habitat metric and not a biodiversity metric. We have nutrient neutrality, which is got its sights at completely the wrong people. We've still got planning concerns because they're small developers aren't typically within allocated sites, and if they are, they don't get prioritised in the planning system, which delays the development. And if you see in the last just 5 months, we've seen prices go up by 20% for materials, and the year before 25%. We've had red diesel being removed from the construction industry, and that hasn't resulted in better environmental outcomes. It's just required higher costs to actually fuel your machinery and higher thefts on site. Solar panels may be required on site and add on because they won't necessarily be part of the fabric of the building as the Part A would like us to be. And unfortunately Part Z, because as enticing as Part Z is, it has some flaws, and those flaws may be that, first of all, it's going to be poor for houses because it does it on the standards will be set on the majority of homes that are delivered. Now, the majority of those homes, 40% of flats, may end up being the flatted type, which means they don't have to worry about the carbon intensity for roads, and they might be able to use timber more easily in their buildings, CLT. So there's going to be complications on house builders paying higher amounts or being restricted from using particular types of materials. So industry has got a lot of costs coming forward, And in order to really deliver better environmental climate outcomes in terms of energy efficiency, we really need to understand and wrap all this up together to understand the complexity. Because as it is again, SMEs are the ones that typically are going to be delivering these homes the first. And the importance of that is SMEs train and retain the majority of developers. There's the majority of apprentices, so 7 in 10 apprentices are trained by SMEs, typically employed within a 20-mile radius. They are effectively the backbone of the industry, but we've seen as their opportunities and their pipelines have shrunk and they're operating hand to mouth, so have the amount of apprentices that have been delivered. So economic growth and economic strategy, higher wages, better outcomes, it's really wrapped up in how we work with SMEs, and SMEs will be built to the standard, but currently Part L is making things complicated and become more complicated still when we add alongside all the rest of the different things that are required of us. So it's good in this webinar to see some solutions coming forward. Any questions, obviously, hopefully I'll be able to answer that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rico. Can I actually ask all of our speakers to please pop their cameras on and mics on, and we'll jump into the Q&A. We could address is I've just had a look at the poll results there, and actually for that first poll question, a majority of our audience was actually unsure how prepared their businesses are to deal with to deal with the regulatory changes. How does that surprise you, or is that sort of in line with what you expect? And do you have recommendations of how, I guess, they can get sure and then address it? I guess it's like a multi-part question there.
So I guess, do you want to go for it, Rico?
Well,
Yeah,
I can go very quickly because I think Mike is going to give us more of a technical way to actually meet the requirements. People are really unsure about how to meet these requirements. We've written a couple of articles, so we've got a Houseboard magazine, and we wrote a 2-page spread in there, and we've got loads of comments saying, Jesus, we didn't realise what was happening here, and they actually liked our tone because we looked at explaining what the concerns are rather than simply stating what the regulations are, which actually makes things quite complicated. And obviously we know with EPC standards that they measure the cost of energy in the home, so that makes things a bit more complicated in itself, because actually it makes heat pumps look worse, which is not a good thing, and we're trying to work on that with government. But yeah, it is really complicated across the section. We've got to remember here there are 2,000, 3,000, maybe up to 6,000 builders out there, and we represent around 700 of them, so it's a really small share that we really represent. How do we make sure that they all understand it, and not just that, do planners understand it, and what are the perverse outcomes? We must avoid them.
Absolutely. Mike, did you want to jump in?
No, I was going to say the only thing that would have been surprising is if everybody was ready. That's the only thing that would surprise me. But look, I think the key is that what businesses should do is partner with a provider that has kind of done this or has experience around it, and not necessarily Zutec, but a Zutec-like kind of business, and take the advice and the lessons learned of where it was already done. And really, that's my take on it.
Bro, Steph, I've had a question come in that I might put to you in the first instance, but then if anybody else wants to pick up, are you finding that the clients are across what they need to be for you to be able to meet? Is it the realistic expectation in briefs that you're receiving and stuff like that this is being designed in, or is it something that you're having to talk to people about to educate the client as well? And how does that work both ways?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say it varies. So we have some clients who are very forward thinking. I mean, a number of clients on Mike's list, for example, are very forward thinking, and they have got their own ESG strategies in house, and they're pushing for, what was previously 35% above Part L, and now, that's sort of been revised down, but essentially they are targeting net zero. But a few of them, I won't name any names, have got kind of net zero portfolio targets by 2030. So those clients are coming to us and saying, how can we deliver on these promises that we've made? And that's very satisfying, and we are doing things like whole life carbon assessments that account for Part L as well as embodied carbon to address that. And then the other side of the spectrum as well is the kind of uncertainty and I guess I would also flag that at the beginning stages, it's very easy to set targets and say, this is what we're going to do, really high ambitions, and quite particularly as Rico says, when costs at the moment are turbulent, to say the least. And what's happening is the targets can be watered down kind of as you go through the stages, particularly, and then kind of value engineering side comes stage 5. So it is really important that kind of everybody's on board with the narrative and everyone is in it for the right reasons, and we're making decisions on a educated and intelligent basis. It's not just, I think target hitting itself is a bit simplistic and not necessary, but also having kind of accountability and rationale behind why you're making decisions is really important. So if anyone else wants to add to that.
Did anybody else have anything they wanted to add on that point, or do you think Steph's covered it off there?
Covered off for me anyway.
Yeah.
Well said.
I would second. I would second. Yeah, look, Steph is 100% right. I have seen targets come and go so often, and I think a great example of that is, look, we need to get on board with the realism of delivering these outcomes, and a great example of that is people go on about the zero carbon homes. Oh, the government got rid of zero carbon homes. No, they never got rid of zero carbon homes. They got rid of the code for sustainable homes level 6, and that included zero carbon homes. And it's because people wouldn't divorce zero carbon homes from the rest of the regulations. And it's this sort of narrative that floors progress, because it means that then we don't take seriously the challenges that we need, because we try and shoot for the moon effectively, and then we get stuck along the way. So we really need to be realistic. You know, passive house is a great example. 26% of local, or 16% of local authorities would like passive house homes. Well, good luck with 300 passive house consultants in the UK, you know, and a very restricted model of how you deliver it. So we need to start being realistic so we can actually plan for quicker outcomes. And Stephanie's absolutely nailed, you know, how we get there, and it's kind of working together and accepting, I guess, it's a challenge that we have to work towards, and value engineering, unfortunately.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, sorry, my sound just dropped there for a second. I don't know what's happening with my computer today. It's just decided to plot against me. But the next question that we've had is actually one about that idea of working together in the collaborative aspect of achieving these ambitions. And are there, you know, examples of best practice in that that people can take example on how to achieve compliance to these, you know, regulatory shifts across the supply chain? Because I guess if one part of the supply chain isn't working with the rest of it, you're not going to hit part L or part F or any other net zero goals that we have.
Yeah, so I can answer that a little bit. So I think it's a bit like how it was with CDM when they instigated kind of principal designer. It's about having somebody who's accountable for that, and you know, someone who takes responsibility and ownership and makes sure that we are hitting all those targets we need to hit in relation to part L, O, F, S. And and also it's about kind of going back to the collaboration point, that everybody's engaged in that conversation at the same time. Like you can't, if you forget various consultants or people are out for the conversation, then or not aware of the changes, for example, the targets, like you can't expect all of the consultant team to be all on board with all the regulatory changes all the time. It's just not realistic. So it's important that everybody has their expertise within their different areas that they're working with, whether architecture, M&E structures, whatever, that everybody kind of has their bit that they're responsible for. And then there is somebody coordinating all of those bits to make sure that they all come together to a coherent and consistent design that's on time, on cost, and all of the other things that we need to comply with as well. So I mean, you can't argue that buildings, as Rico said, is getting more challenging and it's getting more complicated. And with every regulation and with every kind of challenge, there's more things to think about. And it's not impossible, but it does take a lot of organisation and kind of being quite proactive about, you know, learning about what are the changes in Part L. You can't just ignore these things anymore. You have to be quite engaged with the building process and all of the kind of regulatory and statutory frameworks around that as well. So planning is one of those many other things to think about. So yeah, I think that's not an easy answer to that question. It's just kind of hard work and collaboration together and conversations.
Absolutely. Did anyone want to come in there on the collaboration point?
I mean, look, from the software perspective, you know, you want to make sure you select a tool that has the widest ability to have as many stakeholders collaborate as possible. And at Zutec, that's been kind of one of our core tenets in developing the technology over the years. Make sure that it's open to as many people as you want being the key, because sometimes you don't want certain stakeholders with access to the information at a certain stage. So really, you know, we take a sort of a low risk approach where we partner with somebody and we roll out over, you know, we do like a proof of concept with as many stakeholders as they want to involve, and then we demonstrate the ROI, and then we go from there. So this is sort of a stakeholder driven, who do you want in, who do you not want in, you know?
Absolutely. Rico, did you have anything you wanted to come in with on that one?
I mean, it's just policy point of view, really. You know, part of my job is making sure the government understands that they shoot for the right targets, and you know, people like Stephanie will deliver on the outcome on site. And what she said there is absolutely correct. You know, it's the only way that once you get regulation, you can actually make sure it's attained. So, you know, that was great advice. And obviously, Mike, yeah, you are right. Make it easier for us, please.
Here's another one. Again, Steph, I might come to you in the first instance on this one, but it's around the role manufacturers play in all this, and do we feel that they're typically providing the products that contribute to carbon reductions at the rate at which we need them to be provided?
I feel like that's a loaded question. Yes and no. I think, okay, so it's a difficult one because, I mean, as architects, we've got a whole regulatory framework, a design framework to manufacturers and suppliers, and whole supply chain have their own regulatory frameworks to work within, which are equally as complex and challenging at the moment. And that's to do with kind of EPDs and performance. And, you know, as far as we're trying to keep up with Part L regulations, they're trying to keep up with all of the things that's required from them around the kind of fire regulations, for example, which is a big, I mean, we know we're going to touch on that in this talk, but a big kind of level of uncertainty around, you know, insulation, natural materials, for example, you know, what is combustible, what's not combustible, where can it go, how does it perform? And I think it's a real challenge. I really sympathise with the kind of supply chain and manufacturing, because the processes and the hoops that they need to jump through are as challenging as the ones that we need to jump through. So it's kind of, and I don't think there's a blame there. Obviously, the more information they provide, the easier it makes our job. And we know what to look for if we're looking for kind of certifications. But the problem, there's so many certifications out there, so many different ways you can get kind of performance criteria, whether that's like red list materials, or whether that's, yeah, as I said, EPDs, or whether that's kind of BREEAM, like star ratings on the BRE guide or the green guide. And I mean, it's a bit of a minefield for them in terms of performance, and it's also a minefield for us for understanding, you know, what to spec where. So I would actually sort of ask Rico as well, you know, how do we bring together all of these numbers of different performance standards that we have around kind of building materials into, I guess, a more kind of policy-driven, singular approach to what we need to achieve the building performance that actually this country needs to retrofit and kind of build homes ready for 2050. Over to you, Rico.
I think it's a really fair question. I think the Part Z is a really, but it's something I actually think about quite a lot. And I think Part Z is a really important factor here, because I've seen Part Z stray towards ideological vision of how we build. And let's say it is an ideological vision of how we build. Well, concrete is the second most used resource on the planet, material on the planet after water. So wouldn't it be nice if we had a strategy whereby we could reuse and recycle concrete? But of course, that doesn't fit within the ideological vision of Part Z. So perhaps you would have concrete slabs that can be reused again, pre-filled concretes. These sort of strategies would be quite helpful. Same with the brick manufacturers. We've seen some moving towards decarbonising how they produce these materials. Remember, 74% of the materials we use in house building are made in the UK. So do we want to rip that opportunity, those opportunities of greater export and production from the UK simply for an ideological reasoning? And I worry that we are in a position where we look at something like tiles. They would love to get hydrogen. Hydrogen is probably the best approach for them to actually unify their kilns, but they are struggling to get planning to get those opportunities across the line and struggling to get recognition for that. So this is a really wide challenge, and unfortunately I think too few architects, especially because a lot of this thing is led by architecture, understand the commercial elements of building. And there's always been this friction, I guess, between architects and builders, and I'm always asked, oh, how does that go between them? Builders love architects, they really, really do, but they hate them when they don't appreciate what it's like to actually be on site and bolt things together, because that means, or just afford it. So the complexity is actually quite difficult, and I think that we really need to appreciate that we need to be quite strategic in how we deliver better outcomes. And look at something like Passive House, and I think Passive House is fantastic, but it requires, within the model itself, it requires major renovation of the building after 60 years if it's built well. That's at the core of how it works. So our homeowner's going to wreck that envelope, and therefore the whole strategy that Passive House operates on doesn't work anymore. So I think we just need to be quite thoughtful. But also we've got lifetime of buildings. I've seen MMC procurement contracts for 60 years, and they're not going to last 60 years, but yet my home is 120 years old, brick built. So maybe traditional isn't always that bad, and maybe we need to have a serious conversation about what it is we're trying to aspire to achieve.
Sorry, I lost you there for a second, Rico. I think your mic just dropped for a second. Sorry, I thought you were done. Didn't mean to interrupt. But I was actually just going to jump in with the next question when and this one's probably to you, Mike, in the first instance, if that's okay. And it was about challenges that you've seen, it's specifically addressed to you, so I will put it to you in the first instance, but challenges you've seen your clients sort of have with implementation to start achieving these things, and how those challenges have been overcome. Is there any particular barriers that you've seen to compliance, and how to address those?
I mean, look, we're going in with a solution, right? So we're kind of saying, here's how it works. The challenges we encounter may not be the answer to the question you're looking for, but we've all kinds of challenges, like people on site don't want to use mobile apps, and you're kind of trying to say, guys, you got to do this. This is what's needed. So you're trying. It's a mindset change you're up against there sometimes. The adoption is a big piece. And really, other than that, I mean, from our perspective, we do sit with the clients for a long period at the beginning to outline how it's all going to work and to implement it properly. So really, if it's not meeting the challenges for complying with Part L, we haven't done our job, So the challenges we come up against are those normal kind of digitization challenges that any business comes up against when they're trying to digitize something. So it probably isn't the answer you're looking for, but
no, I think that was, in this case, they were asking about processes for implementing systems to achieve. So I think that probably is exactly what the answer to that question was looking for. In terms of something you mentioned there, this is just from me, but you mentioned cultural shift, and I sort of think that probably applies to everything we've been talking about broadly. There does sort of just need to be a general culture shift and reskilling and upskilling. Does the panel feel that this is happening at the pace with which it needs to happen to start achieving some of these things? And if not, or if so, like, how do we continue that, or how do we speed that up?
It's not, I can tell you. I mean, but what I will say is, though, it is getting better. I mean, if I go back, I mean, look, Zutec's a 20-year-old business. If you go back 20 years ago, they didn't use email. We were demoing software to them, and they're looking at us like, what do we need this for? What, you know what I mean? So there's been a massive change. And I can tell you really where the point of mass change was on the back of the iPhone and the tablet technology coming out at the end of 2008, 2007, 8. that was when people started to, there's a big mindset shift in most people that they would adapt technology because they had it in their hand every day. And that was really in the last, and that's even a long time ago now, but it should have been quicker, right? It's still not quick enough. We still go to clients, they still don't want to use the technology. And, you know, what the good thing is though, once they start using it and they see the value of it, then they're like all on for it, you know? So it's just about getting over that immediate barrier, because once they're through it, it's fine. So they should have adapted 20 years ago, is what I'm saying.
I would add a kind of slightly different kind of, I guess, more architectural point to that, but it's about retrofit. Like, I think the building regulations are really good. Well, they're okay. So there's two things. The kind of building regulations aren't as good as they should be because we're not at the future homes and building standards yet, which is essentially where we need to be to ensure that we're not going to need to retrofit our buildings again to get before 2050. So that's a kind of no. The other no is that kind of 80% of the buildings that exist today are going to exist in 2050, and we in the UK have, like, I think it's the worst in terms of insulation and building performance and like building stock in the whole of Europe. So we absolutely need to, as a country, have a retrofit standard. If you look at the number of retrofits that we've had since the current government have been in power, is absolutely fallen off the radar. And I know Rico's retrofitting his home at the moment, but actually I think that's kind of a rare case. And, you know, with energy prices going up and the amount of you know, discomfort that people have in their buildings, you know, the performance, the building fabric that needs to be protected, the heritage features that you need to retain as part of, you know, what is quite an old building stock. We absolutely have to start addressing retrofit much more seriously. Beyond, which is further beyond Part L. It's that, and that is 100% a cultural mind shift change that needs to happen before buildings can even really seriously take themselves seriously about addressing energy efficiency, because without retrofit on a significant and mass scale, it's not going to happen to any extent that, like, the UK Green Building Council have got in their roadmap, for example. We're going to really fall behind on what we can do as an industry and our footprint. So that's in terms of cultural shift, that's one of the biggest challenges I see. And that also has to do with, like, health and well-being and damp and mold and moisture and all of the other things that come around. But I could go on and talk about it for a very long time, but I won't.
No, absolutely. Rico, do you have anything that you wanted to add in on that one?
Yeah, well, 16.5 million buildings are built before we had building regulations in 1965. Around 12.5 million buildings are built up until 1950, where we still had traditional building methods. So you might have lath and plaster or suspended timber floors. And actually, retrofitting my home at the moment, one of the reasons I'm doing it is because I actually run the heritage section of the NFB as well, and I helped write the national retrofit strategy, or the policy side of it rather than the technical side of it. And I recognise that actually we don't have a really good understanding of the market enablement. And if we're actually going to retrofit our homes, we need trillions. We see you banded, 20 billion, 40 billion banded around. You're bang wrong. It's trillions if you want to do it properly. So how do we ensure that we have better and cheaper products so that people feel more inspired to do it? The reason I'm doing it myself is because I don't have £8,000 to £10,000 just to retrofit my floors and stick in underfloor heating and rectify all the issues, and that's just doing my floor. It's nothing at all. So we need to utilise all the opportunities available to us. 1.2 million homes in conservation zones, 10,000 conservation zones themselves. Good luck making any changes there. Energy Sprong won't touch any building before 1965 because they already can't get the aesthetics through on the buildings that were built by councils, let alone the older buildings. So really, we've got to stop thinking. Now, I'm probably a bit critical of groups like Insulate Britain because they don't understand the complexity of this and they make it really simple. And a good example I use of that is cavity wall insulation. Even the new stuff isn't great. It really isn't great. External wall insulation is great, but only if you do it on all walls. If you do it on one or two walls, you're probably going to create some potential issues. So if you really want to make coherent, good changes, we need to understand that this is a really big task, and that will require very brave government decisions. I live in a green council, with a local authority with a green council. They would not let me put an EWI, an external wall insulation, anywhere on the front of my building in case I ruined the lovely look of it. So are they really serious, or are we simply pandering to ideologues again? There are some brilliant people like Steph, who will actually come out with solutions and design these solutions, and Mike will be able to tell you how it works and why it works. But unless, I guess, people like myself fight for them to enable those changes, it's going to be really difficult to do that, and that's why policy is so important. So just on the Part L thing as well, Steph, actually, say if we move towards an NFIT or a passive strategy, that can filter down to the retrofitting standards, but government hasn't quite understood that you can work down, not just up on the standards. So there are lots of different things that we can involve to reach a better approach across the whole of the UK, but unfortunately it requires really strategic thinking, and I think that we are focused.
Brilliant. And that actually brings us to the end of the session as well. That's wrapped it up at a really nice point, I think. I'd love to thank, first of all our speakers across Digital Building Week, but specifically Rico, Mike and Stephanie for being on our last panel of the day. Really, really appreciate it. If anybody wants to go back and catch up on this session or any of the others, they're all available on demand across all 3 of our sites. That's Building, Building Design and Housing Today. And if you are interested specifically in this session, on Monday, we're launching our next conference, which is Net Zero Live. So check that out, and there'll be lots more topics on this sort of area. The final point from me, we would love to thank our audience for taking part in all your wonderful questions. But also, if you wouldn't mind, there'll be a survey that pops up at the end. It will take you 30 seconds to fill out. Just make sure that we keep on putting on sessions covering the topics that you want to hear about. So if you really enjoyed today, let us know, and we'll make sure we get all these guys back again to talk to us more about all these topics. So once again, a huge thank you to Mike, Rico, Stephanie and Zutech for letting today happen. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Cheers.